Okay, good evening. Welcome to the Act 46 Formal Study Committee meeting on September 14th, Thursday, September 14th, 6 o'clock at the CDC. And thank you all for being here again tonight. You guys are real diehards. First order of business tonight, I guess, is to review minutes. I will say that we've been to a lot of meetings this summer. I'm pretty sure the last meeting was here, right, at the CDC? So I think it says library here, so.
Jim already said, maybe I need this so I know who I am.
Yeah. Sorry, Richard, we've been jumping around a lot. The only other thing I have is on page 3, line 1. There's a blatant attempt by Monks and Bump to take over power, but I think this motion was for Colquhoun, French, and Campbell to meet with the town clerks.
Yes.
So anybody else have any comments on minutes?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion approved, second. Any other comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Minutes are approved. So I'm not quite sure how we want to manage the course of this tonight, but the agenda calls for an update on the merger study report and articles of agreement. I did send an email out to all of you. I don't know if everybody had a chance to read it, but there were 2 judgment calls we had to make in order to keep our place on the meeting on September 20th. And one was that the agency didn't want us to use the word union in our name. They didn't want us to be the Mount Anthony Union School District because they thought it would be confusing with the existing MAU. So they wanted us to be the Mount Anthony Union Unified School District. We pushed back against the extra U, and we pushed for Mount Anthony Unified School District. So it's at least MAU still, and I hope that's okay with the committee. We didn't have a chance to check in with people, but and then the other thing was that the inter-district school choice, which seemed to be something that people felt like was a good idea, the ability to move around if you're on the edge of a school district within our school district. Donna Russo-Savage had offered a way to work that into the articles, and so we took advantage of putting that into the articles. It's not in Article 10, John, which is the one that goes in the ballot. So it's to your point of not mucking up the ballot with more language, but it is a little bit more of a firm directive. So hopefully that was okay. Any dissent on any of those? Okay. So that's what went in. That and some minor corrections went in. And I also sent to you the agenda of the school board, which is set for for the 20th of next week, and we are number 5 on that agenda, unless something comes up tonight that we can't keep things together and we have to flip to the October meeting. But I'll let Dan cover that. So that's the summary of the email that I sent out to you. And Dan, I'm not sure when you want to handle the town clerk stuff, but Cassie's here from the town, and if we could shoehorn that into an early discussion, she might be able to go home earlier.
Yeah, we can do it now, or...
Do we need to change the agenda for that, or can that be part of the reviewing the draft merger, or update on the merger study?
I think it was the update.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yep.
Everybody? Okay, so a couple of issues have come up. We're so lucky to have Cassie Barbeau, Bennington Town Clerk, very carefully watching these things, and a couple of issues have come up. And Cassie, would you like to come up and just tell us what you're thinking? And we have talked to Steve Stitzel. There are some responses, but
If you'd rather sit down.
sure. Give us your best thinking, please. It's very helpful.
So my biggest concern, and I don't know, it seemed minor to me when I was reading the Articles of Agreement, but in communication in the last couple of days, maybe it's not so little, is there was wording as far as after the first election meeting in November that each subsequent balloting at the annual meeting, whenever it might be, I'm assuming it would be March, it requires commingling. And to me, what that means is, and from being advised by the Secretary of State's office, what it means is at the end of the night on election night, all of the clerks would need to gather the ballots from, excuse me, from that election and the tabulators and go to a central location together to count those ballots. Now, I also got an opinion, well, not so much an opinion, but sort of a play-by-play from the Secretary of State's office today to get into even more logistics that I hadn't thought about. And it actually goes counter to what state statute says, which says ballots shall be counted at the polling place where they are cast, except where the Secretary of State, upon request of the presiding officer, has issued a determination that the ballots should be counted elsewhere. And so this is from, the email is from Lori Bjornland. She's an elections administrator with the Secretary of State's office. And in her play-by-play, so to speak, she says that if the ballots are to be commingled amongst the towns, once the polls close, you would need to make sure all towns have approval from us here in the elections division. This would be for each year, each election, to remove ballots from the polling place. You would then need 2 election officials to transport the ballots and have another presiding officer available to preside over the counting of the ballots. So logistically, it's a little bit of a nightmare, being that wherever Pownell's polling place is versus wherever Shasberry's polling place is, that might be in excess of 30 minutes apart. It's 9 p.m. already on a 15-hour day. And of course, state statute says ballots shall be counted at the polling place. So I also communicated with Manchester, who indicated they had a concern about it as well, and it wasn't really addressed. And so then I got thinking, maybe my thought of what commingling means versus what the committee and the consultant are thinking commingling means are different terms. You know, maybe it's just the ballots shall be stored at a central location after the vote. Keep in mind, all towns except for Woodford are machine towns, so we turn a key at the end of the night on election night and get most of our results right from a tape, with the exception of any hand counts or write-in ballots. So that would mean a separate voting machine from any other election that goes on the same day, assuming it's town meeting day. And that adds to your costs as far as the tabulator cost. So that was my big concern. It doesn't require commingling for the first vote, and that's the way I think it should stay. That's the way we do it with Mount Anthony every year. We are basically, each town clerk work together as far as the ballot. We work with the same ballot company. We all get our own, however many ballots we need delivered to each town clerk. Then we store them in our own vaults, and we report at the end of election night to the district clerk what each town results are. And then, of course, I'm the MAU clerk, so I have Shasberry's results, Pownell results, Woodford results, Bennington results, and then I have a total tally. I guess that's about it as far as that goes. The only other concern I had was the actual ballot. The way it looks like it's proposed, it's very, very long. I don't know if that's required. I know that in a couple of lengthy issues that we've had in my tenure as town clerk, I think it was a charter change. We actually had the wording hung in each booth, and then the ballot question itself was very small. Shall we adopt the such and such charter change as presented?
Thank you for bringing that, but don't go anywhere. So, because this is going to get good, everybody. Clearly we all want to do what's reasonable, but so you spoke to Steve Stitzel this afternoon. You had some conversations with Donna Russo-Savage. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll just summarize. I think it's a great point. It's awesome to have someone reading fine print on this stuff. And I've done a couple of them. And what can you see what's on the screen? This is remember Article 10 is the ballot part. So in the opening of this, where it says in the third sentence there, the vote by Australian ballot and ballots will not be commingled. So this is the initial vote to form the district. So at this point, the town school district still exists, and it's sort of business as usual. And the votes, as you know, we have advisable and necessary districts, so we need to determine which districts approved the merger and which districts did not. I think the next part of this is down in number 7, which is sort of establishing how future elections would occur, number 7, Australian ballot. So this is assuming that the merger is successful in that initial vote. And what we have here is the new unified district modified voters shall vote in the budget and other public questions by Australian ballot, with polling places provided in each member town. Ballots will be delivered to the district clerk and commingled for counting. So I think, Cassie's point is, could we undo that? And I hadn't really thought of it. I just assumed, firstly with at-large, remember we're doing at-large voting, and I know the issue with the state about when you're forming what we're doing here, which is a unified union district where we're actually dissolving the town school districts. So the town school districts don't exist anymore. So the question is, could we do that or not? And the state's reaction initially, I emailed the state this morning and said, hey, we might have a change coming because we're trying to get this thing scheduled for the 20th. And, if it was going to be something you guys wanted to address, we were prepared, Donald and I were prepared to tell them to yank it and put it on the October meeting. But I alerted Donna Russo-Savage, who's, the attorney at the state, that we might have a change on Article 7. And she's like, what do you mean? And she basically came back with a quote from the Secretary of State's office that when you're forming a unified union school district, they require commingling. There's no option. But we weren't sure at this point, so we consulted with Stephen Stitzel, our attorney, who's pretty much an expert on municipal law, and he also got back to us this afternoon and said, yes, it's not an option. So unfortunately, since we're contemplating forming a unified union school district and dissolving the town school districts, there's only going to be one school district municipality, and that's this unified school district thing. And the polling places, the way Donna sort of explained it, sort of, use Montpelier as an example. Montpelier has polling places in neighborhoods of the district, and those ballots are not counted in those neighborhoods. They're brought to a central place and counted. So that essentially, your choice is, if we're going to form a unified union district, you don't have an option to not commingle. That's what we understand right now.
What do they do with CDC?
Yeah,
We do not commingle.
Yeah, and it's not.
So why do you have to go through all this crap just to please the state?
Well-
Have the state change the rule?
Yeah, the thing is that with this merger, you're dissolving the organic town school
Baloney.
districts underneath. Yeah.
It's baloney, period.
So even the case with like a union school district, like Mount Anthony is an example, you have local town school districts that are members of Mount Anthony conducting the election. In town school districts, more often than not, the town clerk is also the school district clerk, and the school district clerk is the election official that presides over those elections. But in this case, you're dissolving those town school districts if the merger is successful. So town clerks are no
Same,
longer
it's
school district
the
clerks.
exact same thing as CDC, and Cassie's in charge of CDC. As far as accounting, as far as getting all the ballot initiatives together, that's up to Cassie.
Yeah, except you still have sub-municipalities involved. Here in this merger, you'd be
And you
dissolving.
still vote
Are you talking
one
the second
place.
vote or the first vote?
Second vote.
Subsequent.
So,
Subsequent
the
votes,
first
yeah.
initial vote has to be done separately because we need to verify whether the individual districts approve the merger. But what we're hearing from the state right now and from our attorney is that there's no option under number 7 to do what
Well,
Cassie
have them
wanted to
change
do.
it and make
Well,
an
it's
option.
interesting because 17 VSA 2582 specifically says ballots shall be counted at the polling place.
Right.
And 2590 says that the ballots shall be stored with the town clerks. So then at the end of the night at
You gotta bring them
midnight,
back. You gotta bring them back.
so how do I uncommingle all the ballots so that each town
Yeah.
clerk gets their ballots so that
I
they
don't
can
think,
sort
I'm not an
to
expert on this,
2590?
but I would say that the definition of the municipality shifts from being, you're no longer the election official. The unfortunate person, whoever gets appointed to be a union district clerk, is going to be responsible for this. But I think that's an area where Stephen can provide some advice. And to the point on Manchester, I did their merger as well. They haven't gone through this process yet. I mean, they had their initial, what you'll do as an organizational meeting. They haven't had to do the commingling yet. Their first test go-round will be in March.
It
Well,
does,
I can tell you now, the town clerk in Manchester is very concerned about
Sure.
it. And she was, apparently she tried to speak to the committee previously, before it went to vote in March.
No, she never came to the committee per se, but I know there's concern, and that's why it's
Yeah.
important that we have your input now, because it's really, this stuff is, unfortunately, there's a number of districts that have already done this, so it's pretty clear what we're hearing from the state. But I think, tomorrow perhaps we can hook you up with, either Stephen or someone from the Secretary of State's office on this, but. what
Well, I
we're-
spoke to the Secretary of State.
Yeah, but I think the
We're getting two different
qualifying,
stories.
yeah, no, but the qualifying thing to say is what's being formed is a unified union school district. If you just say union school district merger, the rules like MAU apply, but when you're forming a unified union school district, and prior to Act 46, we only had like 2 in the whole state, so it wasn't really, there weren't really good rules of the road on this. But I think if we can certainly bring together some expertise on that for your satisfaction.
Well, I don't know that it's going to satisfy me because
Yeah.
logistically, it's just not
Yeah.
reasonable.
No, it's.
I think that's right. It feels to me like it's not reasonable that every year you should have to ask permission to transport ballots, that there should be 2 people that have to transport the ballots, that there has to be somebody that oversees the group. I don't think the state intended that. I have a feeling that there's something
You don't know what the
else.
state
Well, we're not getting
intends.
into a big, long discussion about what the Secretary of State's office keeps putting on us and why I'm fighting with the legislature every year about
Yeah.
election law.
Yeah,
It's just not reasonable.
yeah. So other thoughts, Dan?
Steve?
So I think there may be some, maybe we have to get some legal opinion on this, but I think there's a difference between polling places and districts. So, yeah, we're not going to have all the school districts in the world, but we're going to have all the same polling places. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't get a clarification from the state that the ballots can be counted at each polling place, but the ballots are then considered, part of a single district's ballots.
Oh, excuse me.
Whether or not where we store them, I think is, who cares if eventually they have to be stored in a central location?
Yeah, that's.
Counting them at the
Yeah.
polling places seems like the only sane way to do it.
I don't really know, I do know what I'm hearing so far, and it conforms to my understanding of forming these types of districts, is that the ballots need to be commingled. The mechanics of doing it is something we need to work with the town clerks on to figure out a good process. And there's not a lot of specificity on some of these things, so we have to work through it. And pretty much every merger has to do that with their town clerks. But it is a fundamental structural change when you're dissolving these other municipalities. So once again, in town school districts, under the law, the town school district clerks, or the town clerks are the town school district clerks unless the voters decide to hold an election and elect someone else to do it. This is going to be a different animal. This district will have a district clerk who will be elected at the first organizational meeting, and that person becomes sort of the de facto election supervisor of the district election, which is now going to have multiple polling places.
So we're at a little bit of a hard spot here, Cassie, but it feels to me like, I think probably most of us agree that it feels like some unreasonable request would be made under the statute that you're reading, but there might be another interpretation. The dilemma is that if we throw the brakes on at this point to rewrite this, it puts us into the October meeting instead of the September meeting, which means that we would be warning a ballot before the Agency of Education approved our proposal, which is
Right, I understand
problematic
the
for,
position that you're in as
yeah,
well.
for a number of reasons. So I guess the thought would be, is there a way that we could get together with you and anybody else that you would like, any other town clerks you would like, or maybe just you, and the secretary of, well, whoever you think would be
Yeah.
the final voice on this tomorrow, and really see if we can run this to ground, because it feels like there's some missing information.
Yeah.
What's everybody else feel about this?
Well, I've been a justice of peace for 35 years, and I know one thing. I worked every voting poll, and the voting, they're sacred,
Mhm.
and we could not leave them, take them out of the poll.
Uncounted.
And the
Right.
thing is too, if you move ballots, you have to have a Republican and a Democrat together to move the ballots.
Good
And they
luck
can't
with
be
that
on,
in Vermont.
huh?
Good luck with that in Vermont.
That's not, no, but that's.
What about independents?
You have to do, yeah. That's exactly what you have to do. Because I'm the Republican that moved to the party, okay?
Well,
So,
there are instances prior to these types of mergers. I had a district, Meadowy, some of you might know, Union District 47, that commingles its ballots. And they, as part of their articles, move those ballots to a central location and count those ballots. So that's done in the supervision of the district clerk. It's in their charter. It actually put it on a warning every year because they take turns where the ballots are going to be, and they move them back and forth. I don't know about the Republicans, Democrats.
No, but to move them, you have to, they
Yeah, I mean,
have
but
to, they have to be JPs, and you're gonna have
I
one
would
of
agree
each
with
party.
that. Yeah, and that's what we need to
That's
get
the
clear
law.
on. But yeah, it's,
To get back to your question, Donald, yes, absolutely, I can meet with you tomorrow.
yeah. So I
Would
think
you
it's-
have time for that?
Yeah, I'm available on phone. I would say, I was trying to distill this down for an action point for the committee. I think, the time issue is one thing, but, and that's how I pursued it this morning. I was trying to pursue it so that we were going to try to make this change, so you knew you'd want to accommodate this concern. Then subsequently, I've concluded through hearing from the state and from our attorney that it's just not possible to change this language. So if that's the case, are you still supportive of presenting the merger articles, knowing that this is going to fundamentally change how you handle the balloting and voting in these communities around school district issues?
Why is it not possible?
I mean, because they're saying you have a new definition of the municipal boundary, which is going to be this new unified district.
Somebody ought to get a hold of their legislator and tell them it's a crock of baloney and to change it. Just that simple.
I just have a really hard time believing that we can't have different numbers that have polling places that submit numbers that are then aggregated. We do that
For everything.
for the senators, and I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
I think there's probably a nuance there as to counting versus tallying. I don't know. That's
So
where
maybe
Stephen.
what we need
That's
to
what
do
I'm
is just get the
wondering.
state to give us a
Yeah.
directive. Yes, you can count them at each polling
Yeah.
place, but you have to tally them all and announce them together as one number.
Yeah, there's probably the
And then-
mechanics of that have to be worked through a bit. And I think, fortunately for you all, you have Stephen, who's one of the best municipal attorneys in the state. And the Secretary of State's office is really available on these kinds of things in Vermont. So they have some expertise, and I'm sure, between Stephen and the elections officials, we can get some clear guidance on this. But as of right now, and Donna at the state is working through the Secretary of State's authority on these things, that's how they viewed unified union districts. That absolutely have to have commingling. It's not an option.
But what does commingling mean?
Right.
That's the
Right,
question.
right,
And commingling could be we get all the
Yeah.
tallies from all the polling
Yeah.
places.
And that's
we
when they're
announce them as a single-
commingled, but not
Yeah.
necessarily
We
transported.
don't have to commingle them.
So let's not spend a lot of time speculating,
Yeah.
on commingling
It's not-
tonight.
It's beyond my expertise on, so I
Yeah.
mean, and some of this is like, fairly
My-
new, but I think, once again, I think you have some expertise in your clerk and your attorney. I think you can find a path forward. But-
So if
In my conversation with Steve Stitzel today, it didn't discuss transporting ballots.
Yeah.
He had a different definition, I don't mean to speak for him, a different
Yeah.
definition of commingling.
Yeah, he might be able to assuage us. Honestly, I don't, it's not an area I have
So
expertise.
I guess what I'd like to know from this committee is if we can figure out something with Cassie tomorrow that doesn't involve having to call every year and getting two people to drive the ballots around and having somebody overseeing it, if we can find something that's a little bit more like what we have right now, where they get counted in place and the tabulation gets commingled at a certain location, can we proceed with this next week?
Yeah.
Can we go to the Agency of Education? And I guess the corollary question is, if we cannot do that, should we pull it off of the agenda next week and roll the dice and take our chances with an October submission, which means that we're warning a ballot that's not approved by the Agency of Education?
I'd say go for it, but when you go for it, call up Mary Morrissey, call up Bill Botso, and tell them to get this thing changed. Tell them it's an idiotic law, they're the ones that screwed it up, they should be the ones to fix it.
I mean,
And let them know it.
The fallback position, which I started with this morning, was that the voters, the way this is set up under Article 10, is the voters can subsequently change this. So if you were to set this up initially next week with commingling in number 7 under Article 10, and we find out there's different ways to do this, or we can clarify this subsequently, the voters can modify this language. So one of the perhaps first orders of business of the organizational meeting would be to modify this.
In time for the first election?
Yeah, because the organizational meeting will be done from the floor with the Secretary of Education presiding most likely. And that's required, that's specified in the law. There's a series of articles that are required to be addressed, including electing the clerk, setting the annual meeting of the district, and so forth.
So that's something of a relief valve then, that gives us a little
that's
bit
how I
of
started
a...
this morning, thinking if it was possible, that was my primary lens at that point this morning was, is this going to be able to be done in time? But now it's a question of can we do it at all? But I think, just to reintroduce that concept, if we come up with a better way to do it, It's legal, the voters will have the opportunity, if you submitted the articles as written, the voters would have an opportunity to modify this at their first meeting, which would not be an Australian ballot. It's going to be a floor vote. It's just on a prescribed series of articles, but you could introduce something at that point.
No matter what happens, you've got the experts in Steve and Cassie, you can let them work on it. If it doesn't work
Yeah.
out, we've still got more meetings to go.
And there's
apparently
other-
into eternity,
Yeah.
and we'll just.
There's others mergers that have
Make a
encountered this
change.
issue, like Cassie mentioned Manchester. There's, probably 20, 30 people that are going to go through this very exact same thing. So there's probably going to be a convening of clerks, either in face-to-face or online.
It doesn't have to stop it where it is,
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, I know I'm not on the committee, but I would like to say that that sounds like a viable option, so that it doesn't hold you guys up with what you need to do. If it's something that could be decided
Yeah.
as sort of like a charter change, so to speak,
Yeah.
at the first organizational meeting, I'm comfortable with that.
That'll give us 3 months to work on it. really.
Yeah, the organizational meeting, if the merger is passed, it'll be within 60 days. The Secretary of State will certify the new municipality, and the Secretary of Ed has 60 days to convene a meeting. And the agenda to formulate, and Jim will have input into that, and that's where you introduce that article to modify something.
But isn't there still the question of whether it could be modified?
Yeah, I'm not convinced it can be. I think, we still need to explore what is meant by commingling and the detailed mechanics of how that would look. But if it can be, fallback position, if we find out it can be, I'm just playing devil's advocate. If you go forward on the 20th with this and you find out there's a way to modify this language somehow, that could be addressed at this first organizational meeting, prior to actually holding any election that would, subject to managing ballots and so forth.
And then if you can't modify the language, it stands as is.
That's right. And you just work on the details.
But we give
of it.
John 3 months to call the legislators and get them on the
I'd
job.
call them tomorrow. I would.
Good, Dan.
Because 3 months, they're not going to be back in session until after the first of the year.
Before you jump in, Dan, Amy, you've been sort of trying to get in for a while. Are you?
No, I'm good.
Are you good?
Yep.
Okay.
I just think the simplest thing is to get the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Education together and say, let's have a common sense interpretation of what commingling means, and just put this thing to rest. If they're not going to be reasonable, then we do have to. But
Hunt to October.
I'm expecting them to be reasonable. So by the end of the day tomorrow, I'm hoping you have
Where you from?
clarification.
Okay, there's going to be a slight pool happening after we go off camera here, so bring your wallets. No.
What's the 20th of September?
So the 20th of September is this meeting.
State Board of
Which
Education.
is State Board of Education, and we're number 5 on that list at 1 o'clock, which is when communities go and they present their merger proposals for the state's approval. And if anybody would like to come up, that would be wonderful. I think Dan and I and maybe Jim are going to go. I don't know if that's enough, Dan? Do we, Jim says it's a pretty small room.
Yeah,
But-
this will be in Montpelier Library, Montpelier High School Library, and, some merger committees, do dog and pony show presentations. I think I've seen that drop off over the year. I'm not necessarily in favor of that kind of style anyway. I think you give some bullet points, and if they have questions, you answer them.
Because when we saw Donna's email.
Yeah.
What are we bringing for, what's our audio-visual requirements, what
Yeah,
maps and charts?
Yeah,
and
I'm
Okay.
thinking we just bring some good snacks and call it a day.
I think they're,
You guys are going up there and you're going to present the pros on all this?
no,
Is anybody talk about the
if they have
cons?
questions, what happens is that the report is one document, the other document is remember that merger template worksheet we filled out?
Yeah.
And then the third document is the one Donna writes, which is a recommendation from the agency, yes or no, is this merger a good idea? So before the state board takes action, they get a recommendation from the agency that says, this is a good idea, we support it. And her analysis will include, here are the pros and cons of what we're reading in this.
So, but everybody that's going up is for it?
No.
Is what I'm saying?
No.
It's gotta
We're
be
just to
equal.
answer
If
questions
there's
on.
technical questions of process, they'd like to know sometimes process. It's not a selling job. It's to speak if they have clarifying questions. Donna does her analysis. She does the presentation, pros and cons,
And she gets her information from you guys?
from the report.
From us, yeah.
In the state's context.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a one-sided.
Yeah, the committee,
Well, we voted. so-
yeah, the committee's unanimous.
Unfortunately, I got in the last week,
But you're still part of
Yeah.
the final vote.
and what I've said so far has been thrown under the table, so.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's been thrown
on.
under the table.
Well, it has been negatively given back to me. This is
But
what I'm
you can
saying.
go to
It's
the
not-
meeting, sometimes they,
Unfortunately, I work.
yeah, and sometimes they don't, allow anyone to speak to it other than the committee members. There's been one instance I know of where they've allowed a committee had a minority opinion, and they let them speak, but the board overwhelmingly approved it. And then subsequently, the voters in that town overwhelmingly approved it. But their process, I think, what I'm seeing now is that this meeting in particular is jam-packed. These presentations are not going to be long. They're probably going to cut down on the audiovisual stuff. And really, if there's technical points they have questions on, they might ask you. They might be interested in the political dynamics of your community. They might ask you, what are the pros and cons politically of doing this? They might want to hear that from you more so than me or Jim, Donald. But other than that, I think it's going to be a pretty quick up and down vote.
And Cindy, really, this has for a long time been at this point about letting the voters decide, getting it to the point where the voters can decide. And it may well get shot down, but it may not. So I think that's the thing we have to do, is
So
we have to...
When do you explain to the voters what they're voting for?
We're going to talk about that next.
Okay.
So after we get through this. But I don't want you to feel like we're going up to the state's going to approve it, and it's going to become law, because that's not the way it works. We're going up to the state, and we're going to explain how we got here, and then they will decide whether or not we can vote on this.
Does it conform to what their policy intentions are?
Yeah. Is that too simple?
Is it legally constructed? No, it's
Okay.
basically what their criteria is. Does it meet the criteria of the law?
It's just so convoluted, the whole thing, the whole package, that it needs to be explained in simple language for people to understand it.
Great. Well, so hold that thought, because we are going to need that thought in a minute. But before we go there, Cassie, I sort of, the thinking of bringing you up early was that you wouldn't have to stay for the whole meeting if you didn't want to. But do you want to set a time to talk tomorrow?
Early is better for me.
And I'm sorry to do this, with everybody sitting here, but
10:30, so,
if we're going to let you go.
I think the more restrictive schedule will be Stephen
Yep.
or Donna or whoever.
I'll send him an email now.
Can you see if he could talk at 9? Would 9 be good? Okay,
If he's available. I don't,
okay,
I'll contact him, but it's in a meeting tonight, so.
okay. Should we tentatively, 9 o'clock?
sounds good.
Okay.
And I just want to say that it seems like the consensus of the board is supportive of my plight, and I appreciate that.
Yes, we
The
are.
consensus of the board.
Yes.
So do we want to vote on this? I mean, I do feel like we're pretty clear that if all the folderol with the two people and the moving around of the ballots and all that kind of stuff has to happen, then we punt to October. Do we want to vote on that, or is there any dissent? No?
If it's what we have to do, I think we just move forward and then we try to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, if
you
the
know-
law reads as it's stated in the articles, then that's what we have to do. If
okay,
we can change it after 60 days at the first floor meeting, we change it then.
okay. So then the consensus of the board, as I'm hearing it now, is that we continue on as planned for the agenda on September 20th, but we try our hardest to work things out within the letter of the law tomorrow with you, Cassie.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yep. And I am going to stay for a little longer because I do want to hear about this ballot, because I'm concerned about how confusing it is too for my voters.
Want to talk about that while you're...
Yeah, that's really going to be Stephen's thing as well. I think, the point, and I was just going to speak one other, I think Donald mentioned two issues in the past week, and this is, and I said to Donald, this is typical of the end part of the process. What we're trying to do now is just get this before the state board, and so there's been last minute editing and so forth. And this afternoon, we got some additional comments from our attorney. They're not major changes. Just want to point them out to you. There was some wording, if you can see this on the screen. Oop, I didn't do that. But where it says incorporated school district, either one or two member school districts. Can you see that line there? Either one. I'll just get up here and move that.
You need a pointer.
Where it says either one or two of the member districts, Donna from the state introduced that language as a correction in the draft I submitted. Stephen tonight basically didn't like it and wanted us to go back to the other language. So that kind of change isn't a major change for me, and Donna's sort of the gatekeeper for the state, so we just let it ride. It's not a change in meaning, it's just Stephen's preference over a grammatical construction. But there is a typo that surfaced tonight, and that's on me. I just want to apologize for that and point it out to you, and how we might deal with that. So we scrambled a bit last week to introduce this article about elementary school choice. Here it is. I think Donald emailed that to you, Article 11. So this previously did not exist. My guidance to you was to put this in the narrative body of the report and basically recommend the new school board take this on as an issue. Donna, in her feedback, said, actually you could put some language in the articles. We've allowed people to do that. I kind of shied away from this because I thought it sort of infringed on the board's, policy-making authority. But they've allowed this kind of thing. Basically, as you can read for yourself, the school board is required to adopt the policy. And we did, as Donald mentioned, we broke this out of Article 10. So that means Article 11 can be amended by the new school board if it saw fit. So we thought that to be a reasonable balance. But in the process of doing that, I inserted a new article and kind of moved the numbering wrong. And I forgot there's another article that references that article. So the numbering is off, if I can find it here. It says, as mentioned in Article 11, Article 11 is now the school one. So I have to go in. And what we'll do at the meeting in Montpelier is basically say, we'd like this one little amendment, before you consider this. And if I can find it here, I had it a second ago. And one of these, it ends with a reference to Article 11. It's about selling the schools, buildings. I think it's the real estate one. Maybe it's up in the center. Fine, I just want to point it out to you. Here it is, right here, Article 6. So you can see in the Article 6 at the end, the last paragraph, filing its organizational is further discussed in Article 11, so it's talking about transfer of property. That article is now pushed a little further, so that number needs to change. So when we go to the meeting in Montpelier, one of us will say to the state board, we just want to, before you adopt this as our articles, we just want to know there's a change that article references the wrong article number now. So that's not a major issue. That's how we'd handle that kind of stuff. Other than that, Stephen had some corrections in Article 10 itself, mostly grammatical kind of things or structural things. That's okay because this sentence here, the form of the article to be submitted to the voter shall be substantially as follows. That gives us, the state board can vote on this as it's constructed now, and then what actually ends up in the ballot, we'll have some wordsmithing going on, and Stephen will take the charge of that aspect of preparing the ballots. But literally, this right up until today, this issue we were just discussing, this document is still kind of moving around a little bit. Now it's kind of locked down, but it's hard to do the ballot information until this is stable. I think we're at that point now. So what Stephen can do is now provide some guidance and leadership on the ballot formation and the election process and all those kinds of things. He can go forward and start working on that. It's unlikely that the state board would require any modifications of these things at this point. I know yesterday, or maybe it was this afternoon, he produced some guidance on what the petition would look like for folks to get on the ballot for a school board director position of this new thing. So, he'll be creating those kinds of guidance documents, and we'll, we talked about trying to provide the sort of packet of information and work with the clerks on implementing this stuff. But anyway, that's really the only other change other than the name of the district, as Donald mentioned earlier, that it's Mount Anthony Unified School District if it's approved. Even if it's a MUD, it's still the Mount Anthony Unified School District. I should say to you, the state's still going to call it whatever it wants to call it officially on the books up in Montpelier.
They can call us a MUD if they want to,
They're going to
but
call you.
we're going to call ourselves Unified.
Yeah, you can call it. So there's going to be that tension. Any questions on that? I just wanted to make sure you were up to speed on the articles. But that's the process now. It's pretty much, going through this hurdle at the state board meeting, and then the next topic on the agenda, I believe, is to start discussing how to do what Cindy's point was, how to do the engagement on this and explain it.
Can we talk about maybe reducing the volume of the, what's going to go on the ballot?
Yeah, I think that'll be the question for Stephen to do that part.
Oh, okay, so he's going to take the...
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, that's really for him. And there's some legal limitations on that, but, there's also some places where we can move some things, but that's really his expertise.
Okay.
The point I'd make in relationship to the articles as presented to the state board, because that language that says substantially,
Yeah.
They're going to approve something. We still have the ability to sort of work within that framework. But there's been several different approaches to ballot formation.
But that's something we'd discuss with Cassie and Stephen tomorrow. So
Sure.
2 items, both of Cassie's items, we'll get, hopefully run to ground tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And we'll get an email out and let you know what came of it. So,
Thank you.
thank you, Cassie, very much for paying such close attention and coming so well prepared.
All right.
Not that we'd expect any less of you. Okay, so the next agenda item is really about, Cindy, what you're talking about, which is communicating some factual information about this. And Dan has sent out did everybody receive his draft? And he was reluctant to send this out because he felt like he didn't want to lead the witness in terms of, hey, thanks for coming. He didn't want to have the committee feel overly prescribed, but I think many of us would agree it's sometimes easier to have something to start with than, who's got her? Okay. So we have something to start with, and it may not be where we want to end, but Dan, would you like to sort of talk about what other committees have done and how this might play out?
I think there's a couple issues. One is to start thinking about what individual communities need, and individual community needs are different. I found sometimes you can think about bringing groups together. There's certain strategy to saying, well, you're promoting this idea of merging, so why not try to bring multiple groups together in the same room, meaning multiple towns. But a lot of committees start to talk about specific strategies for engaging different communities, because different communities have different constituencies. So you might think about groups, there are going to be groups that are probably really interested in this information, and then there's groups in your community that aren't necessarily going to come out, and you need to go find them, So to try to make sure everyone that's going to vote understands what's involved is really important. So there's things you can do in terms of events, thinking about holding evening events, publications, such as an FAQ document. I find the FAQ documents really useful for the committee members themselves, so they have bullet points, factual bullet points to talk about. Other things outside of that, thinking about what other media you might use. Are you going to do something with the public access television station? Meeting with your select boards, meeting with your state reps, meeting with any other community groups that might be of interest, business leaders. So every community is a little different in that regard, but trying to figure that out on a community basis, and time being of the essence. So basically you're looking at the vote being November 7th, assuming the state board approves this next week. The vote's November 7th, and you've got to back away from that to figure out what are, if there's open houses that you can leverage and put, anything out like that. If you already have parents coming in, for instance, talking to the staffs, talking to the unions, talking to the leaderships of the building so they all understand it. But if you already have events scheduled, if you have an open house coming up, something like that, you should have a table art for the Act 46 merger. Something about that. Those are some of the strategies I've seen people use.
So what do people think? It's one of the things, well, let me tell you what I think. One of the things that Cindy and I talked about early on, which would be different from what you've done here, would be to have a one-pager that would be really stripped down. Kind of like, here's what happens if we do nothing. Here's what happens if we merge. Almost like super simplified. And maybe the financial information, what it means financially for each community, what it means for the small school grants, what it means for the protection of small schools, and what it means for the board structure. I don't know. Those would be the highlights I would want to see on the one-pager. I guess maybe there should also be something about the values, too. Maybe we lead with that.
It really is different by community. Some communities just want to see the tax thing. Other communities don't care about tax. They really don't. They're more concerned about what does this mean, for local control, So every community has a slightly different emphasis.
Well, let's go around and see,
Yeah.
what do you think? Let's start here. What do you think Shaftesbury would like? What would help Shaftesbury in this decision-making process? It's complicated, there's a lot to read, there are a lot of nuances. What would be the best way to sort of get information to voters to allow them to make this decision?
I mean, we've had meetings already, we've done community meetings, they've been fairly well attended over the last 2 years. We had Barry, who tends to send an email to a group of people who've already signed up. Jeff Johnson's been good with having group meetings, so, for us, I think, it's just reach out to the community. But I think a lot of the stuff that they want to know is information. Like, what's the debt? What's going to happen to local control? Are the numbers too big with Bennington having 4? These are the things that I think they're concerned about. The pros of the thing is, what's the long-term plan? You're not going to see big changes now, but in 7-8 years, if numbers go down, what's that mean? That's where you start, looking at reducing cost of staff. Potentially, if there's small enough numbers, reducing one of the school sizes. Those are the things that you look at. You have the short term, which is now, in the next 2 years. Then you have the long term, which is 6-7 years out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure exactly, which way to pitch it. That's the thing. Because I think people want to know the pros and the cons.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're talking about pitching, are we?
No.
I think we're talking about,
You get information.
yeah, sort of,
Informing.
it does feel like the benefits are nuanced. And if you don't take time to read anything and you're just voting on the word merge, you might vote it down just because you don't like that word.
Yeah.
If you took the time to read it, you might say, well, there are a lot of little benefits in here that add up.
And there's a lot of little negatives that don't add up. It's just giving the people, I think, the information.
Mm-hmm.
I think having to strip down information for me, that's what I want to see. Is, what's it going to cost me, short and long term, like as far as debt. How much
So that tax rate information that
tax
we've,
rate,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is to be, what's the benefits long term? You're not seeing benefits the first couple of years. The tax incentive is short-lived. Can you say that's a great thing? It goes away in a couple of years. So in a couple of years, it's going to be negative. So.
Actually, not in Shaftesbury, you guys.
Yeah, that's the thing to keep being careful about.
Yeah.
Tax incentives, some of you benefit from the merger
Yeah.
regardless if there's incentive.
Some don't.
Yeah, but, and I would qualify that to say that's
then the
provided
CDL.
we're using the numbers we're using now.
Yes.
Who knows, it's not to say you're not going to spend money like drunken sailors after the merger.
Yeah.
Or, so. But you're, based on the modeling now, you benefit from the merger before incentives.
Mhm.
But Shaftesbury's in a bad position because not all of Shaftesbury's going to be impacted by that. Half of it, more than half of it's going to be North Bennington.
North Bennington.
Yeah, so so it's not going to impact Shaftesbury. So that's something they got to figure out, the way you present that.
Because, you can go to the, select board, and if they're all District 1 people there, they don't want to listen to it. But you're selling it for the high school level too.
Right,
that's
but
the-
but Shaftesbury's not Shaftesbury, it's,
Yes.
Shaftesbury and North Bennington.
Yes.
So you're split. So it doesn't apply to everybody in Shaftesbury.
No.
Well, back to the sort of notion of outreach, what would be helpful and not condescending, from this committee to Shaftesbury? Is there anything that we could do that would be helpful? That would be received in the spirit that it's intended?
Honestly, I think when you had that first big meeting at the firehouse station a couple years ago, I think that was just, here's information, put the information out there and go back to your community, then they can answer the questions. For me, I think, for all of us to go through each community and say the pros and cons, I think gives you the big picture, which is, whole community-wide, with all 4 towns, whether you do it in the fire station, like I did a couple years ago, then you go back to your community and dissect it further.
That's an idea?
Because
Kind of sick of the fire station, but. maybe, but yeah. So what you're saying is a centralized meeting
Yeah.
with all communities invited. And
Just present
a
information.
presentation, a sort of unbiased presentation about things, and then it's just the facts. And then
Just the facts, then you go back to your community.
I think we need to have one in each community, though.
Yeah,
I mean.
then you have
oh,
a small
okay.
one in your community.
Well, but with the committee, with this committee attending in each community, presenting to each community equally.
I don't want to be negative, but you know, you really have to tell the people. You have to explain to them too about Bennington being necessary and the rest of us being advisory, and then we're giving up.
Yes.
We're giving a big vote up. It's not just that they're gonna have 4 people in Bennington. And it just took me a while to understand that part. Like I said, this whole thing is so convoluted that I need to break it down and be able to explain it to the people. And I, you know, nothing against this group, but you've all been pushing because you're so afraid the state's gonna come in and do whatever they gotta do, that there's no, everybody's just going, okay, we better do this, we better do this. I'm not like that. I'm saying, damn it, we're gonna stop and we're gonna figure out a way, another way. You know, and, you know, don't get me wrong, I
No.
like each and every one of you guys, but this, I'm so afraid if this committee goes into town of Pownell, well, we're gonna explain to you people what we're really doing. I don't want that. I want them to know the truth. It's not that you're not telling the truth, but you're being positive.
But I
Nobody
think
said
by-
anything about being positive.
Yeah, I think that's
You're
why
gonna put the
I have
facts out there. The fact is, this is a fact, this is a fact, this is a fact.
And that's why I think having a big meeting,
If you don't like the facts,
You lay the
then
facts
vote
out.
against it.
and then you go back to your community, and if they have more details for the Shasberg, if they say, I don't want to pay this debt, I gotta be saying, this is what you need to consider. If you don't want to pay the debt, you gotta vote no. I mean, I don't want to say that in a big meeting, because it doesn't apply to everybody. But for Shasberg, if you have somebody who comes up and says, the debt scares me, why should I vote yes for this? You know, that's the point where I say, if that scares you, you can vote no. know,
And you can
go-
also have it imposed upon you by the state, so.
You can also impose
This is why it's so important we get to the voters and explain to them, you have 2 options. The state's gonna do it this way, or we're gonna do it this way, and we've been, no offense to you, but I think very thoughtful in how we've come up with the merger documents, and we've thought about the small schools, large schools. I think it's an excellent compromise that brings large districts together with small districts, and I'm very positive about it. I'm not ashamed to say that, but I'm not gonna be out there promoting, I'm gonna be giving facts.
Right.
I think this
You have to
board has
stick
done a
with
great
facts.
job
You gotta
of being
get-
thoughtful, and we need to get the facts out there.
Right. And one fact may be, if the state comes down, that you may be, Bennington might have 36 votes, and Pownell has 1, and Shasbury has none, and, you know,
That's right.
you don't know.
And somehow it'd be nice to push that information out without using scare tactics, you know? We
But it's a
don't really
fact.
know, but it
It's
is
a fact.
it's a fact that proportionality would certainly lead you to this conclusion, that Bennington would have a lot of votes.
Depending on how the
Yeah.
state says it's gonna structure it.
And
Right.
I can't imagine that they're going to come in and they're going to do it like a clean way. And that unfortunately, in their minds, is the clean way with the proportionality. They're not going to say, oh, okay, well, we understand the supermajority for your town. And they're not going to take the time that we're taking here to figure out, okay, well, we don't want a supermajority. We want to make sure that everybody has a voice at the table. And we're providing that opportunity now, and that's the big difference if the state does it versus if we do it. I mean, that, and besides the incentives, and we can move past that because whatever the incentives are, that doesn't really matter. But the bottom line is if they come down and do it, they're going to do it their way. This is our opportunity to do it in a way that is fair for everybody, as opposed to that supermajority. Because chances are that's what's going to happen, because they're not going to be that thoughtful and take the time to really consider our specific nuances of our
They're
area.
not even thoughtful when they drafted the whole thing up 10 or 15 years ago. They don't think. They just do, and then they say, oh my God, well, I never thought about that. Well, that's the trouble, they don't think. So we have to do the thinking. Okay, we make the presentation the way we think, not the way we do.
Well, it does feel to me like we could try to distill this down to, without doing a sales job, it feels like we could distill it down to maybe 3 of the most salient points. Why should we do this? You know, why, if you're not sure whether or not to do it, why should we do it? Well, one would be, we worked really hard on this, but the sort of mix of the future board, right? So we've talked about that. And this notion that big communities and little communities need to coexist without having the little communities completely overshadowed by the big community.
No
So that-
supermajority.
Yeah, no supermajority, so that would be one. And then the other, I think, would be that we've made it harder to close small schools than the state's likely to. So the state would normally take 4 years, right, to close a school. We've pumped that up to 5 years, and we've added 2 years of a process that has to be a supermajority vote by the board, and it has to happen over 2 years. So that would mean effectively 7 years as opposed to 4 years. So we've actually given extra protection to the small schools like Pownell and like Shaftesbury. And it seems to me that would be our second really strong point. And then the third strong point, I know we dismissed the incentives, but like I said, I calculated them for Bennington, and there's something like $1.8 million worth of savings to our taxpayers, which, as I know I'm not supposed to talk as a select board member, but as a select board member, I would love to save $1.8 million for the town of Bennington. And I know that those are only, you know, approximate numbers, and those are based on some pretty generalized data, but they're nevertheless based on the data we have. And I wouldn't be ashamed to push that out to anyone in Bennington. So those would be besides the fact that we are looking at greater efficiency, and we're looking at you know, the $100,000 that hopefully we would save with efficiency, and hopefully more educational opportunities, which is the kind of lead to all of that. Those are my 3 top bullets that I'd like people to understand. I don't know if there are other things that are really important to people. Yeah.
Maybe what we try to smooth things along, because I think we could talk all night
yeah,
about what should be and what should be. Maybe we could just come up with a plan for the outreach, and then we can fill in what needs to be in the information that goes in the outreach. So I'll just make a suggestion. Let's have a kickoff meeting at the Mount Anthony Auditorium, where we have Dan and you make a presentation, get all the facts out there. And then maybe we have follow-up meetings in each community, maybe not, but I think we got to start somewhere, and we've got to start. We only have less than 2 months to figure this out. I'd like to have a schedule.
I'm thinking that, and then my math will be up, but somewhere around September 23rd is the start of the 45-day clock to the November 7th election. So
we got to
Yeah.
start putting some dates down and making things happen.
September 23rd is close.
And I could be off by a day, it was kind of quickly. And,
That's next Saturday.
yeah, and that's, and we still have to get to all the individual boards, right?
Well, there's no point really, is there any point in doing that until we've gotten the Agency of Education sign off?
Yeah, well, I mean, to Jim's point, the warning, you can't do much until after the state board votes. But you should be ready to go. Between now and then, have Stephen working on
So if that's the
warning.
20th, then the week of the 25th,
Right.
we're going to need to hold either a joint carousel meeting of all boards, the presentation of what went to the state, and see if boards agree to warn
Yeah,
one
the
ballot.
advisable boards will have the option not to warn this if they don't want to. So that should happen, has to happen within that 45 to 30-day window to warn.
Will we have an answer from the board on the 20th?
Yes.
Is it a rocket docket? Do we know before we leave?
I would think so. Everything I'm
It's a public
seeing right
vote.
now
They
is
take the vote right
they're going
now.
to vote, in favor for this. I mean, just on the merits that it conforms to the requirements, that's all.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
We do have the SVSU meeting on the 27th, so I don't know if we do that's at 7 o'clock on the 27th, whether we, depending on what happens on the 20th, whether we tentatively look at doing early before that meeting, a carousel meeting too. That'll be at the library of the middle school, so we could see if the cafeteria is available on that night and do it prior to the SU meeting, since there's a lot of members already available that night. So I think we could look at that and then what happens. One, what happens tomorrow, and 2, what happens on the 20th.
And Bennington doesn't vote on the articles because or the board, school board, because they're a necessary district. the committee's basically compelling them to warn the vote.
So they don't need to hold a vote to warn?
That's correct. Because they're necessary.
So Pownell, Woodford, and Shaftesbury.
Those advisable districts need to vote, decide if they want to warn this.
I want to make sure that the BSD was included in that.
Yeah, I mean, you want to include it, but just technically speaking,
Yeah.
they're.
Hey, Don, can you, for the presentation, do up a pro and con sheet? Give everybody a chance to say what they want for a con and what they want for a pro. I think that would be helpful to, make everybody feel easy.
Okay.
Easier.
Do you think we could do that by email?
Yeah. I don't see why
It would be
not.
nice to not have to do that in a meeting.
Right, no, that's fine.
Okay.
But just, I think that should be part of the presentation.
So how would people feel about, I like that idea, and how would people feel like an email coming from me to all of you for your
Input.
input, which would be the things you feel like are the reasons to do it and the reasons not to do it?
Right.
And then we would make sure that anything is factual, because we wouldn't want to put, if you put out a
But
reason.
you don't want feeling, you want facts.
Put out your factual reasons why we should or shouldn't do it. Don't put out your
Yeah,
fantasy.
This is a fact, this is gonna happen,
Yeah.
and this is gonna happen.
Okay, I'll do
So
that.
this may have a negative impact, and this may have a positive impact.
Yeah, I'll do that.
But these are
Okay.
gonna happen.
Yeah.
And it's different, because positive for Bennington could be negative for
Right.
Shasbury.
That would be,
Right.
that would be a great thing to put in a presentation for folks, here's, you don't put committee names down, but here's a list of things that after studying this and working through it, here's things that committees observe, and just put it out there,
Yeah,
Good.
just,
Yeah.
don't hide it, just put it out
Yeah.
and let people think the way they think.
Okay, Dan.
Could I suggest that maybe you and Dan and Jim put together the one-pager, so to speak, that you'd like to see, and maybe circulate that through the committee, because I do agree that a one-page document that can really distill it for folks. It can't have everything in it, understand that, but I think if you can include it, the essential language in as brief language as possible, that will help people, I think. It'll also help the committee members to have that at the ready when people are asking questions.
Yeah, okay.
So, does that make sense? I mean, I'm just suggesting it.
Yep.
Yeah. Then we can circulate that too.
So have we decided what the activities are that we're doing? We decided on a one-pager, pros and cons,
The central meeting at
a central meeting at
either
Mount
high school
Anthony.
or middle school.
Yeah, either one.
Yeah.
And is that, or are we doing the open houses, the select board, public access, frequently asked questions?
We talked about public access, doing some type of a community show on that, so that could, particularly you and Dan on that, right? We did talk about doing.
Would this committee be comfortable with Dan and I going down to Mike Cutlerville and doing a little program there?
Another new place?
That along with filming the meeting at the middle school or the high school.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's available.
Okay, okay.
And also, if you have the one-sheeters, give some to some of the local stores, where people hang out, where people buy stuff. I know Winchester's in Powell, put it in there, everybody goes there, so, and they
Coffee
read.
drinkers. So what do we think about the whole open house thing? Is that some, because I know that Molly has an open house on the 28th, I think Shasbury is the 27th.
For the 27th.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that
it's
is
like,
right.
they're coming up.
I go more days.
But if there's SBSU that night, then we have board members won't be at the
Right.
open,
Right,
on the 27th.
right.
If people at a meeting,
Shaftesbury's open house is what, 1 hour that night, right? Is that-
yeah, from 6 to 7.
How do you think that might work? Taylor, is it like a table or
And
a?
I think
I
open
mean,
house,
I think every school's open house, I think, is slightly different. Like, I know at Molly's, there's, it's like meet your teacher, meet your classroom, and so like there's different times for different presentations, but I think if we were gonna do it there, it would just probably be a table in the gym, because that's like the centralized area that everybody comes in and out of.
So maybe the representative from those individual, we'll get a list together of the open houses, and maybe the representative from that town that's on this committee, if they're available, and we have the one-page sheet ready for that time, and the frequently asked questions is ready to go too. We've got copies of that available.
We had ours last night.
Yeah, I mean, we've missed some, yeah.
Middle schools was last night, but the
Yeah.
elementary schools are usually later.
Except for Powell.
So what does that make for a deadline for these things?
Well, the first one is going to be the 20, what I have is Shaftesbury's the 27th. But I just was...
You don't have them all in there?
No, I was just pulling through the school calendars right now, and I'm not seeing the other ones come up, and I don't know them off the top of my head. I know some have already gone by, as you heard.
And 27th is SVSU.
SVSU.
Remember how, I guess how would you just make that work? You know, I mean, I'm thinking, would you sit there at the table and hand out the fact sheets? Because once you start answering questions, you know, you're looking at, you know, if you have 50 people, you know, Shasbury, 80% of the school comes, you know, to teach, you know, parents, but that could be a lot of time. You know, it's 10 seconds a person. I mean, if you had something with in-depth questions, you could get it for 20 minutes, one person. It's kind of scary.
Very.
You know, then you have kids running around too, and I want to go home, eat dinner,
And
Right.
it's a 1 hour.
and it's 1 hour.
It's 1 hour, yes.
Even if you talk fast, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
It sounds like a difficult place to get across a sort of nuanced, wonky thing like this.
Yeah, I was just, I know
Yeah.
it was brought up, so I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask that question, so.
Yeah, I
And I
know.
know that they're coming up, so.
Yeah, and I know both, you know, me and Aaron, we have kids in the school, so.
And yeah, I will be in the same situation, and then going to the SVSU board meeting right after, so.
Because I think it's probably important to brief the administrators and the teachers on this so they can be, you know, fluent in some of the basic points of it as well. And they're the folks that can take care of that kind of level of engagement.
I do feel like you're, and we haven't spent much time on this, although I'd like to wrap up before too long, but I do feel like your frequently asked questions, Dan, this is the kind of thing I could imagine teachers and administrators would want. These are long answers to hard questions. They're not that long, but
Yeah.
this isn't a quickie document.
That's
You know,
right.
this is something you really have to dig in and read. I guess I would love, if people had a chance to look at these, I'd love some feedback for Dan in terms of how could this, is this useful? How could it be more useful? Are there questions that were missed?
Because once it's final, I would love to put it up on our website, at least for, at a minimum, you know.
Yeah.
I think that a bullet or a bold section just about the $4 million bond would be helpful, just to explain what it is, how it came to be, and I forget the language that Dan...
The performance bond?
Yes.
Mhm.
And then also, I mean, some notes I made to myself, and I don't know, I mean, I don't want to, trying to be sensitive to not selling it, but having a history of similar bonds in Shaftesbury, Pownell, Woodford would be helpful. Maintenance that's been done on the schools that isn't being reflected in the current situation. Bennington has a $4 million bond out. What have the other debt obligations been in the past? So that people are understanding, voters can understand what it costs to maintain buildings, what it costs to run districts. I mean, that might be something that's helpful to be broken out, so it's not just looking like, oh, look, Bennington's got this $1 million bond, we need to assume. I mean, there's a certain cost of doing business situation that I think it would be useful for the voters to be able to understand the big picture. And this is a snapshot. It so happens that right now we have a $4 million, Bennington has a $4 million liability, but 3 years ago, Bennington didn't. So
It's also, I think that the important point in that is there's an offsetting revenue stream.
Exactly.
That we're creating by saving the savings in utilities costs.
And I think
So-
that's useful and factual, like we're talking about facts, it's
Well, if you
factual
look
to
at
talk about.
Shasbury, the ventilation system when it first came out was $800,000. You know, why didn't Shasbury pull a bond for $800,000? You know, if we streamlined and got it down to $100,000, $200,000, $185,000, $200,000. You know, we did it. You know, this is the number we were first given by an engineer. You know, we didn't go with the bond route. We decided to put in our budget, deal with the problem then. That's the selling point. You know, how do you tell somebody, you know, Bennington did this, it's a benefit for the school? They're going to come back and say, well, Shasbury did it within their budget.
They're not getting an offsetting revenue stream for that. That's just money out the door, whereas we've decreased our costs by the amount that we're paying in debt, so it's a wash.
But-
And you're also talking about 3 schools versus 1 school.
Yeah, we started at 800,000, you know.
Right, but it's, I mean, it's still,
What, 800?
it's 3 buildings, and and who knows what the actual work, you know, comparing the actual work that was done, I mean, and what went into it. I mean, you can talk money just at its face value, but there's,
But that came up at our town hall meeting last year. is Why should we approve money? You know,
The way I thought of it, and this question on the wall was that you get the benefit of Bennington's economy of scale. So even with their debt,
Yeah.
they spend less per pupil than you do.
like I said, we get it
So-
streamlined down to simple
Yeah,
facts.
so what you're getting from it is, and what they're losing is you're a more expensive district. You operate
Yeah.
less efficiently than,
And-
it's no
and-
fault of yours because you're small.
And I underlined
Yeah.
that. That really stood out at me when
Yeah.
we talked about economy of scale. Because I mean, that is a simple fact that needs to, these are the things that need to be drawn out.
That's why that tax rate is
And
going
can be
down.
on this one-page
Because
sheet,
you're, yeah.
both in the pros and the cons for each thing
Yeah.
just need to be highlighted. I think that's how we're going to get the information across.
and with the debt come the assets too. So, I mean, it's, you get both,
Right.
3 buildings of assets.
So I just think that my point is that I think that that's something that really is, I mean, you know, I agree with Cindy that is, I mean, that could be the thing that breaks, you know, that makes this deal not get done.
Yeah.
Is that liability. I mean, I think that is something that the communities will
Needs to be
absolutely just.
explained, yep.
And so that needs to be dealt with. And
Right,
See, for
and a
seven-
true understanding of what it really means.
an understanding, like, not oh, let's try and sell this, oh, it's okay, but a real understanding about what is the cost of doing this business and what is the cost of running these schools and what does it mean to our communities?
And what came out of it, like Dan brought up, the lower costs of actually running the buildings as a result of that improvement. So,
See,
all
for
those
17 years, our taxpayers have been graciously approving a $30,000 bond for 17 years. We've replaced every one of our windows, every one of our doors. Our building is already starting to save for energy efficiency.
Yeah, and we did it with our roof.
And I think now all of a sudden they're gonna say, well, wait a minute, you know, we've got our building where we want it. Number one, we're gonna give it away for $1, and number two, we're gonna pay Bennington's $4 million. It just happened to fall in place. You know what I'm saying?
But we
And
are
not
paying
being
less.
negative.
But our payments are being offset by savings in utilities. I don't think they're understanding that.
But also our-
Additional
Dan, we
our
costs.
understand
per
that.
pupil.
The problem is that Shasbury did the windows, we did the roof, added, insulation. We've seen those savings in oil costs. We've seen them already in Shasbury.
Yeah.
We did it within a budget. And so, I mean, for me to say, well, we're going to spend to save all this money, Shasbury did without a bond, and we paid for it.
But you haven't done all your school, and you're still
We
going to have
haven't-
more
Yeah,
ventilation
we still
work
more
that you're going to have to do,
ventilation.
which,
We got the gym.
going
But-
forward, that would be
but I mean,
Bennington's share.
You know, I mean, how do you,
Well, don't you just say, I mean, this notion of where does it cost more per pupil? Where does it cost more per pupil? Are you educating your Shaftesbury students for less than we're educating our Bennington students? Per pupil?
I look at the paperwork, we're pretty
So, you know,
close.
is Pownell, is it less per pupil? No, it's more per pupil, but
No,
that's
because
okay.
we keep all of our older teachers, and that's really what.
It's okay, though, it's good. I mean, the Pownell School is wonderful, and the fact that there are fewer students in Pownell, and that it is therefore higher per pupil cost, to me, doesn't matter. because you're doing a great job and you're keeping a community together. And we should support that. And I think this does support that. It brings your tax rate significantly down because you get the benefit of the efficiency of the larger schools in Bennington, even though you're a smaller school and you have the more per pupil overhead.
But it all still comes down to Bennington being necessary, Bennington having the 4, and to me, you're really not following MAUs, because at MAU right now, each district gets to say yes or no, we get to vote. This new board, okay, that you're following for Mount Anthony, is gonna be, if Bennington don't want it, we don't, if Bennington says Pownell don't need it, they don't get it. We don't have a vote. So how is that fair?
Wait, I thought it was the same.
Oh, if
It's
you don't
not.
vote in?
No.
You mean if you turn it down? I don't know what you're saying, Cindy.
The model is the same as the Mount Anthony model. It's the same
I read
voting
it
structure.
somewhere that when you're necessary or advisory, the necessary
No.
is
No.
the...
That's only when we're talking
About
about the actual proposal going through. So in order for the proposal to go through, the necessary
Afterwards.
has to do it, and you need
Afterwards.
two other,
Yes.
not afterwards. Afterwards, it doesn't matter.
Afterwards, it's
Afterwards, the
like-
board's formed, and there's 4, I think it's 4 Bennington, 2 Shasberry, 2 Pownell, and 2 Woodford.
One from Woodford.
1 Woodford.
So it's 5 against, so it's
So
5
it's 5
against
against
4.
4, so we don't have a
Right,
majority.
it's 5 against 4.
It's exactly the same, we've
But if the
we've
state does it,
established
it's
it
gonna be
exactly the
18
same
to
as the
1.
Mount Anthony, so you have exactly that same voice.
And I don't think you've ever seen that type of a breakdown at a vote at Mount Anthony anyways.
Once the school board forms, I'm hopeful that there's just not that kind of
Conversation, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the necessary only comes in the formation of the
Right, just-
district.
Exactly.
Nothing to do with the voting afterwards.
I have a comment on frequently asked questions.
Okay.
So this reference is one of the questions is what are the financial implications of the merger? And I understand why you used the numbers you did for the tax rate, but I think since we've basically accepted that North Bennington isn't even going to vote on this, so we ought to use, in my estimation, in my
I
suggestion,
see.
we ought to use the numbers that don't include North Bennington. And
That's a good
frankly,
point.
they look a lot better for Bennington, which is a nice thing, and they look better for Pownell. And better for Shasberry. And even better for Woodford. So all 4 districts benefit when North Bennington's not in there
That's the
because North
first-
Bennington's tax rate is so high.
But that's the, that's the first year with incentives?
No.
No, it's not without,
No.
without
Yeah.
incentives.
It's a-
Yeah.
Look at the
incentives
look at
come in the
page
next
10.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
With
that
incentives, it's,
drops even more.
yeah.
So just what he's saying, and I don't have numbers on me, but what are the financial implications of the merger is that's a pre-incentive discussion. And I included North Bennington in that. They
If you
could
take North
easily-
Bennington
they
out,
could be
the
out.
numbers are better.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
For every
the next-
town.
The next one just drops everything by 8 cents, what are the financial incentives? Yeah,
It's-
this was designed for you guys to, wordsmith.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I think since we know that North Bennington
Sure.
will not be part of it, we ought to
Yeah.
use the numbers that don't include North Bennington.
I mean, part of it is, I think, for, I don't know, I'll speak for Shasberry and probably Pownell is, so we have to play the devil's advocate. Because, we're going to have that community come out, stronger. And if they want to vote yes, the pros have to be really good pros. And they're going to ask for the cons, which is, that's the, everyone wants to know what the cons are. And the cons, from the big picture, the cons are Bennington much less than Town and Shasberry. There's bigger cons there, I believe, for those communities. I think we all talk about how good the pros are, tax rates, we all agree what the pros are and how good they're going to be. But it did come down to the people who want to see the negative stuff. What's the negative impact?
But it's all colored by the fact that you're going to merge no matter what. So you either get to do it this way, or you get to do the state's way. So
I mean, that comes down to, that's the bottom line. To me, there's the pros and the cons, which I agree, we should always have both sides and just make sure we communicate the facts of both sides, and then the voters need to determine whether the pros outweigh the cons. But regardless of the pros and the cons, we're gonna get merged, and it's just The biggest pro that I see is that we have the control at this point and that we will lose if we don't do it
But you keep
ourselves.
saying that, and now I'm gonna come back with a rebuttal. We really didn't fight or present what we could have to the state when we've already done 80% of what they wanted. So it's not like Upper Vermont where they're just all over the place. We're really pulled together. And yet, we're not giving that, pushing that aspect of it to the state, saying, look, this is what we're doing. It's like, everybody wants something different. They don't care what we've already done. And I think that's where I'm looking at the negative and the positive. You know, nothing against you people, because I think you've done a great job of spending your time in all these meetings, and I know you loved it, because you kept coming back, but there's still this one little thing that just isn't being pushed. What's being pushed is, well, we have incentives, the state's gonna just make us do this anyways, and I don't really believe that.
What's your one little thing?
What one little
You
thing?
say there's just this one little thing.
The fact that we have already combined a lot of our things. We're already together on it, many, many things. There's a whole list of them. But we didn't present that to the state and say, what else can we do to complete this?
So, I mean, we didn't
20%?
propose an alternative structure.
Exactly, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, that's
Say-
the term, but that's what this committee in their early work decided not to
Not to do.
pursue.
We spent a lot of time on that, and I'm sorry you weren't here for that, but we
Me
spent
too.
a lot of time trying to figure out what we thought the best options for the community were, and narrowing down that list of options, and working through what we thought the problems were, and here's where we ended up. And there were options that might have worked better for other communities, but we, on balance, that didn't seem like they were going to work for everybody. So we ended up here, and I'm sorry, Cindy, that you feel so reluctant about this, but I think this represents the thinking of this group. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but we went through this bit by bit to try to get to something that we felt like was a compromise that would be better for our community than what was likely to happen if we didn't do it.
I think we're way past this.
Yeah.
We are way past this, yeah.
Let's move
yeah.
on.
I
If
think,
Cindy
you
wants
know,
to
that's
oppose it, she
the
can,
best
but
we can
the
do.
board has voted.
You know,
What's
for
that?
me, the articles is the best we can do.
Okay.
As a community. You know, what's it come down to is, maybe you can answer this for us, Dan, is if Shasbury, we're in the part where it's, presented to the community. If Shasbury ends up voting no, what's that look like? Or if
Yeah, so
Pownell
that's,
votes no.
if you're,
Or if Bennington votes no, it doesn't go forward.
that's correct. If
And-
Bennington votes no, nothing happens. If Bennington and two others vote yes, then a MUD is formed,
Yes.
the modified union district.
Yeah.
Those that voted no, let's say Shasbury voted no,
Mhm.
and Pownell, Woodford, and Bennington voted yes.
Yeah.
You'd still be part of Mount Anthony, this new thing, it's gonna be
Yeah.
unified union district. So you'd still have your two reps on that board, but anytime something came up to talk about elementary, you wouldn't be allowed to vote on it. And you'd still have your town board. And then you'd be required by January 1st to submit a plan to the state justifying your current structure,
But the elementary.
the Section 9 thing.
Yeah.
And the secretary would put that in her plan and propose that to the state board in July 2018, and the state board would take testimony on that over the summer, and then by December of next year would publish their final plan,
Yeah.
which more often than not would enforce you to merge with the others.
Yeah. And if two districts, if just Pownell and Bennington voted yes, and Woodford and Shasbury voted no,
We're
then
Done.
it's done.
We wait for the state.
You wait for the-
Yeah, I mean, if a district wasn't formed?
Yep.
Yeah, so you're all then going to be required to submit a Section 9 report. And at that point, the state's likely to merge you in a little differently. They would leave Mount Anthony as it is,
Mhm.
and they would merge the elementary districts into a union elementary school district.
Yeah.
So the supervisory union would look like a standard, standalone North Bennington non-operating district, or non-operating elementary Mount Anthony for high school,
Mhm.
a union elementary school district,
And then supervisory.
and then a 7 through 12 Mount Anthony district, and then a supervisory. So you'd have one extra district than what you're thinking about.
Have you seen that done elsewhere in the state?
No, but that's, what we're talking about is the end game of 2019 of Act 46, so we're getting, I've been in conversations where the secretary
gonna
said,
start.
we feel we do have authority to, under Act 46, where it says down to the least number of districts practicable, we feel we do have authority to merge you into a union elementary school district.
Have they?
But we
Because
don't
they're
have
all
the
the same grade alignment.
You're all the same. We don't have the authority to force you into this bigger thing or to force a district to change its configuration, but if there are like structures available, under Act 46, it says you have to merge, so we can do that.
Have you had any conversations with people about, at the state level, about their ideas about formation of boards, what the representational structure is going to look like?
You mean-
That they're
So the
favoring?
governance model they would
Yes.
use?
So I think, Act 49 is the first inkling we see of that. So we talked about at the beginning of the summer, the state board's required to publish model merger articles of agreement. And I would say, yeah, they're most likely to be the proportional ones.
So they are, yeah, you are.
But then you're given, I think it's 90 days to come up with an alternative. So under the scenario where the state comes up with a merger plan for you, they're going to say, here are the model articles of agreement. You have 90 days to come up with an alternative to or else you get stuck with the default articles. But one would expect that that's going to get furtherly refined in the next, further refined in the next legislative session. So this was their first foray into that, but just the anecdotal conversations. I think a lot of that depends on what's left over. There's a lot of mergers going forward now, so.
Okay, thank you.
Might I suggest respectfully, all the people around this table are still hashing out the same things we've done for months, and we need to move forward. Number one, we need to set a date, and I think we've got a rough plan that Donald's going to send out an email, get some input from folks. We can send in bullet points or whatever, but we're not going anywhere.
So I feel empowered with Dan and Jim and I to try to schedule a kickoff meeting at the MAU auditorium. That's number one I have. Number two, I'm going to send out an email to the group. I'm going to ask you all for your pros and cons and how they relate to the merger proposal. And number three, Dan and Jim and I will come up with a one-pager which we'll run by the group before it goes out. And then number four, I think Jim and I, or Dan and I, or somebody will do something with Cat TV. And I think after that, we're going to have to see where we are. I really want to get into each town and offer up the facts, but I'm not sure we'll A, have time, or B, will be welcome. So, I think it's whatever the towns want,
We want tomatoes thrown in.
Yeah.
And we can't do much until AOE or
Next
state board.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
The next- Is it Wednesday? Yeah.
Tuesday, maybe?
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday? Yeah, 20th, yeah.
Is there anything that prevents us individually from throwing out an email on the listserv for our local towns to get together and take input, answer questions? Or is that too early and not necessarily representative of everybody's?
Well, I will say that it feels like, I talked to someone from your select board, and it does feel like select boards might benefit from hearing about this. And it might not be bad for each of us to sort of reach out to our local select boards if possible.
That's sort of what I was thinking of, because there's a lot of folks that simply don't know the basics here.
And it's been a lot to keep up with. We've been hard at it for 3 years and really hard at it for 3 months. So it's been a lot to keep up with getting here.
Nothing to prevent me from doing that.
I would think it would be good, wouldn't you, Dan? I mean, we're at the point now where we've got a final merger proposal. This is going forward. It'll either be up or down on Wednesday. I mean, I guess that would be the only thing, is you could wait until Wednesday and make sure it's approved. But after Wednesday, there's no reason to hold back, right? I mean, it's...
Yeah, just so you feel confident on what you're talking about, that you can explain it to them,
I think we're talking about a lot more basic issues than
Yeah.
what we've been.
Well, just our taxes in your community likely to go up or down pre-incentives. I mean, we've kind of got confused on that a couple times tonight, and you should know that solidly.
We should all know that,
Which
yeah.
communities are going to benefit, which are not, because of this economy of scale, before incentives, and then you can talk factually about the incentives, you know? So those are basic elemental. What is the board structure going to be like? I mean, those are things, you know. And the process probably would be the big, you know, what is this, you know, the vote's coming up when, how, what are we going to do to talk about it?
And would be available to consult with you prior to that, and then you know your community better than we do, whether it would be welcome if Dawn or Dan or I showed up at a meeting, or it'd be better handled just by, you know, local people.
Right, so we'd be willing to join. if it's-
Scheduling's a lot, you know, depending on when it's scheduled, if we're available, one of us could probably be there as support, but not necessarily doing the talking, so that it's the person they're most familiar with doing the presentation.
John?
Just one question about where to register to get your papers to run.
Yeah. Where do the signatures
Do you get them from
go?
your town, or do you get them from Cassie?
Yeah, we're going to have, Stephen drafted something today on that, so my understanding is it'll be out everywhere. You know, and every town office will have this document,
Okay.
and some instruction on how to do it, but Stephen will put out really clear guidance and brief the clerks through Jim on all that stuff.
So that might happen at the end of this week
Oh,
after?
absolutely, I think he did a draft today that I scanned it, looked very, it's not necessarily tied to the articles, it just describes the process, and we're not talking about changing the at-large structure, so that's, he's got a good draft of it right now. So I think, you know, tomorrow probably that could be out.
Right, but to run for the board, where you get your paperwork
It
from?
talks all about that. It says,
Okay.
here's what you do, here, you know, here's where you know. it's
You
got all
should be able
that.
to get them from each one of the clerks.
Yeah.
Clerks,
Yeah.
their own
Well,
town
not
clerk.
necessarily, because if you run for CDC, you get them from Cassie.
Right.
But the new unified district doesn't have a clerk yet,
Yeah.
so for the initial vote,
Yeah.
For the
it's
initial
the
vote, get it
clerk
from the
yeah, in
town.
your
Yeah,
That's
town.
why I
And
said-
the signatures go to the clerk,
Yeah.
yeah, for this first one, just
Yeah.
this first one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's move on from community engagement. Thank you, Dick, for cracking the whip on that. Are there any public comments that need to come?
Hi, thanks. I'm Chris Murphy, Assistant Management School Board.
Yeah.
I think the committee has done a tremendous job in remaining objective throughout this whole process. I would caution you to remain that, to maintain that objectivity. When we start talking about the thing that I listed pro and cons, by definition, you are ceasing to be objective and becoming subjective. One person's pro could very easily be another person's con. So I would caution the committee to stick with the idea of just facts. Thank you for that, and maybe shy away from pros and cons. But thank you. to the
Okay,
entire committee.
stick with the facts, all right.
Who's facts? Alternate facts?
Thanks, Chris. Other comments from the audience? Nelson?
I also think, I know doing like this is extremely hard for committees, and they have to put up with people like me and other people, so. But I looked down the sheet that was down for frequently asked questions. And one of the things, the first one I think is clear, how does the merger vote work when we talk about, like MAU? People should be clear that the vote count might be the same as MAU, but there's a lot of things that are lost by the district. Currently, when a vote is done on a subject out there, any district can actually kill any one and stop something from happening the way the MAU thing is written today. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we should be clear that those towns lose that ability to do that once this new unified board is there, because the board will do it. Okay? And clearly, by defining that Bennington is necessary in the other advisory, you've taken that image sort of away too, because currently they're all necessary, or otherwise nothing passed. Just to clarify that. Then I went over what the modified union, I'm okay with that. When I looked at what happens to the districts when the votes against the mergers, you guys addressed that a little bit, and I think, to be clear, if all the elementary schools vote no, the state can come down and combine all those like districts. So it's not always going to be what you've been hearing, no, they're gonna merge you like this anyways. They're not gonna merge you like it is, they're gonna merge all the elementary schools together. They're not gonna do what you're doing at the moment. So be aware that you both know, that's more than likely what's gonna happen. And the districts out there should be aware of that, because they will become one, and who knows how they'll set up the votes for those districts, or how they'll set anything else up for it, because currently you have an outline that this is how this district will act, and the way they'll represent themselves.
But Nelson, excuse me for interrupting you, but you're not advocating that we speculate in our information about what might happen, are you?
You've said it at least 3 times tonight that they're gonna merge you anyways like this. And I want you to be aware that that's not correct. No. And I'm not speculating either. What I'm saying is the state is gonna do what the state does.
Yeah.
But it's clear that I've heard several times now that they're gonna merge like districts. And MAU is not like the elementary districts. So if all the elementary districts vote no, they're gonna merge them, not with the MAU district.
That's what we think,
That's
right?
what we think.
Yeah.
That's what Dan has told
Do
us.
you-
But every time you speak, and when you talk about it, you say, they're gonna force you to merge like this anyways, and you're not. They could be
No, they're
forcing
gonna-
you 100 different ways.
But that's our point, is that they probably wouldn't merge us like this. In fact, they probably couldn't. And it's likely that it'd be a much different animal that we don't control.
Correct.
I think we've been making that point.
And that's, I want to make that clear too, that's
Okay.
why I said,
Obviously not
who knows what the
clear.
rules will be.
Okay,
Right,
okay.
right,
That question,
right,
yeah.
right.
All right,
So
so-
we got to make sure that's
Yeah.
clear.
So again, stick with the facts, but not, not
So
speculate.
I think if it comes to, when you're saying is, they're gonna merge us like this anyways, the word like should be
Yeah.
out of there.
They're gonna merge us
Anyway.
Yeah, and we are
Right.
subject to merger, but not the model that we're presenting for a voluntary merger.
Well, we do know that the state has, well, I guess the state has told us that they cannot merge an MUUSD.
Yeah, I mean, that's their position right now under the current law,
The
whether
current-
that gets changed or not.
Yeah,
The
okay.
current
Nelson,
law, the grade alignment has to be the same.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
But that-
Please keep going.
I think it's good that you had this discussion
Yeah.
amongst yourself too, so when people are out there representing and saying what the board's going to put forward, that they understand that as well.
Yeah, keep going.
Then I went to, I looked at all the other stuff, the financial incentives and so forth, and I just jumped to the one where I hear Bennington has debt, and they talk about the tax incentives. Tax incentives are what they are. It's that carrot they all present to you. And I have a saying that says, here's the carrot, but when you get done eating it, I'm going to whack you with the stick. Because all that incentive goes away, but more than likely, your taxes won't go down by anywhere near that much. If anything, it'll go up to match the incentive that they're giving you, especially in a large district. And I agree with what Shasberry said and others have said. Even though Bennington is more efficient, it's very hard for districts to understand that they're paying somebody else's debt or taxes or anything else when it comes to taxes. You know, I set the tax rate as a select board member, and they always come down and blame the select board, even though it's not the town and general fund that's doing the taxes. So just be aware, incentives sound good, but they usually mean very short term.
I don't think the incentives are included in that one about the debt.
No.
They're in the other article, just to be clear on that. And
Yeah, I hear Bennington has a debt. It says here, with the tax incentive included,
okay.
is in that,
Yeah, but it goes on to talk more about the efficiency, not so much.
Powell's tax would decrease further to total.
Yeah.
But again, it's saying that
Yep.
the incentive is the reason. And I'm saying the incentive goes away at some point. Assets and liabilities for the district. There's one thing that caught my eye when I was looking over how we budget things, but we work on the budget for the SPSU. Currently, we pay money to lease our building where our SPSU is. Would that become part of this unified district, so there'd no longer be a lease agreement for the rental of this place?
No.
It's a school building,
Yeah, SPSU is, would still exist.
but the building is owned by the school system.
It's owned by
Right.
BSD.
Yeah, but the, under the law, well, first thing is to acknowledge that the supervisory union would continue to exist.
I'm not saying it's not going to
So
exist.
if it exists, under the current law, supervisory unions have to lease property. They're prohibited from owning real estate.
So they're going to lease it in the unified district.
Yes, or whoever, some other arrangement can be made, but they have to lease some property. or the cheapest way ultimately is to locate them inside a school.
Which is
Yeah.
the group would own it and they would
Right.
lease it back.
Yeah, but as long as, just to draw that distinction, that ultimately they still would have some sort of leasing arrangement with somebody, whether it be the new district or some other.
Okay, I just thought it would be money, when you're talking
Yeah.
about 100,000 you save, this could be a little more money. Let's say you got
It's-
what?
35,000 is the lease on that, so.
45?
30,
Oh, 35.
right?
Yes,
35,000 is
that's what
35,000.
we pay.
Yeah.
And the next thing I see is, they talked about the merger, possible closing of schools. The sad part about this, schools might close anyways. They might end up not having enough children, and they're gonna close anyways. So whether this merger had the effect of possibly closing schools after 7 years, I don't think really people should be concerned about that, because if we don't get population, schools are gonna have problems anyways.
I think if I can just interrupt you on that one, I think there's a misperception that this merger proposal, we heard this at one of our last meetings from a fellow who said this merger proposal was going to shut down small schools. And the truth is that this merger proposal is likely to keep them open longer.
At least 7 years.
At least 7 years, right. And I think that's the piece that needs to be addressed, is there's a lot of misinformation out about this proposal, and that's one of the pieces that really sticks in my craw, is that we're working hard to protect the small schools and prolong their life, if possible. And so to be kind of accused of doing something else is difficult.
Yeah, well, after 7 years, who knows what the quote is?
That's right.
Again, it's going to be based on population of
That's
children
right.
and cost.
Right.
So they could close schools, but the
Right.
bottom line is people should be aware is they're not going to close in the first 7 years.
Right.
Unless the community agrees to it.
Unless the community agrees to it, where there's a vote, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, some of the larger districts might be interested in that efficiency piece, in some mergers, it's like, well, that's really where your efficiency is going to come ultimately, is putting more kids under one roof. Why would we want to merge if you're tying our hands about controlling our assets and deploying everything? But it's just to say schools can be closed, but it requires the consent of the community that they're in for 7 years, essentially. Yeah.
So let me understand it. So if it's, even during this 7-year period, if that school votes to close and put their children in another school, that's allowed?
The community.
The community
Yeah, if
itself.
the school board, under the law, has the ability to discontinue the use of the schoolhouse, in this case, it would also require the consent of the community where the school is located. So if the school board started a conversation and said, we need to close this school, under that first 7-year period, they would have to get consent of the community where the school is located. They would also have to warn 2 votes, have a 75% supermajority, and it's a challenging series of hurdles for them to do it.
Yeah, but they could do it, but it almost sounds impossible.
Yeah, but the community can't do it on their own. That's what I thought you were saying. Like, the community wants to close its school. The board ultimately would start that process,
Which would take 7 years. So.
But again, it's only 3 years, but we've tried to extend from what the state would recommend of 4 years, to 7 years through these various mechanisms, allowing for the fact that there may be changes, but that a supermajority would be required to make that vote. So, yeah.
Definitely more challenging.
The other thing is, I'm glad to see it happen, was the school choice thing. I think that's very important, because some schools are teaching a level of math that some other school isn't. And with the STEM programs and stuff that's out there today, and what we need to do for educating our children, I think that's a very big plus for us to be able to move some children around like that.
I think that's right. And one of the things, you weren't at the meeting, but one of the things Dan suggested is that it's even possible that schools could develop, get really good at something, so that the Woodford School might be really good at music or something like that, or the Shaftesbury School might be really good at computer arts or something like that, and so people might be drawn to different schools within the
Academies for
district.
different topics.
Yeah, so I see that as a big positive for it's not like we're exporting our students, they're still in our district, but we could move them around a little bit.
Now, I'll throw something out there that I'm glad that students can move around with choices like that. The other question, I guess, is that the school board, I would assume, would be able to move some children around, this unified board, if they wished. Would they have the authority to move like students into other schools, thinking it would be better for them? or would that school or the...
There's a time restriction on
Yeah.
that, too.
Yeah.
Parallel to the school
Eventually.
closure language,
Yeah.
there's restrictions on the new school board doing that. So it's the same kind of, there's a guarantee for stability, but down the road, after those restrictions are dissolved, yeah, the new school board will have authority to do that.
And we also put the restriction in that prevented the school board from switching the 6th grade, 7th grade thing, which has been so controversial in this community without the consent of the community, so.
Yeah, I'm not so worried about that one as, I think back when I went to school, and they had what was called the little red brick school, and that's where you sent kids with special needs, so they were separated from the rest. I wouldn't want to get into where we're taking people that we feel should be in this school and moving over to this single site. I guess is where I come from. I don't know federal law, I'll let you do that.
I doubt it.
You know, it's
Yeah.
they're pretty restrictive on it, but that's one of the things. Okay, moving on. Let's see. No, I see good for the merger of the education program. I guess one of the things I keep thinking of is when you talk about moving kids around, the other thing being who I am with the computer field, I would hope that we're also, the new school would be thinking about online courses and things of that nature. Being innovative and finding new ways to get some of these instructions across to all the kids versus busing them for 2 hours to some place. We need to have the right instructor that can do that. Maybe that can move around once a month, but most of the teaching would be from a single place.
50 years.
It'd be great to think that this merger could facilitate that and could be helpful in getting closer to that goal, both more creative and more efficient.
Yeah. Well, as a group, again, I'm not saying this merger as much as I think the elementary merger in my mind is very much ability for those schools of similar teaching to be innovative and to do things like that. I think that's where this whole program that started with was, let's face it, Act 60, we're going to equally educate all of our students throughout the state.
Mhm.
And it hasn't functioned yet, and we're still trying to find that right way to do it. And I think, I don't want our kids in this area to become like across the line in Massachusetts or New York, where all of a sudden you got this big, huge school district that's doing pre-K through 12, and everybody gets lost in it because it's become such a big mess. I'd rather see, I think that's what attracts people to Vermont at the moment. You have a small local school, you get involved as a parent with your children, you see things progress, you're working strongly with it. You don't go to a mega board that turns around and, yeah, you're somebody in our neighborhood that we don't know, thank you very much for coming, and it gets lost. We have to sort of try to figure out a way to do it and be innovative, but that's, I'll get off the soapbox on that. And the bottom pretty much said that anyways, I guess, for me, really improve things by sharing things, effective organization and the rest, which I think is good. Those are the only comments I had to do with that. I have a list of questions, but I'm going to save those for the floor when you come down and talk to the selectmen.
Oh, boy. Oh, great. Mother! Thank you, Nelson. Anybody else from the audience have anything burning? No? Okay. Well, so we don't have a next meeting set, but I think that's okay right now. Right? Are we happy with that? We're gonna move forward with this outreach plan that we have, and I think the next thing you'll hear from us is either some draft documents along this line, or maybe what happened at the Agency of Education meeting. So.
What happens tomorrow, too?
And what happens tomorrow? That'll be the first thing you hear. That's right. What happens tomorrow with Cassie and that's right. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Other business from the board?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned. Second. All in favor? Aye. Good night. I'm sorry it was a long one tonight, but thank you, everybody.